Hi, I'm Lisa Singer. I am the Senior Director of Editorial for Brand Insider, and welcome to Brand Insider BTS, where I get to pull back the curtain on some of the most influential women marketers today. And with me is Mimi Swain. She is the Chief Commercial Officer at Ring and Blink. Hey, Mimi.
Hey Lisa, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no, I had to have you. I mean, I saw you. You were at our last what event? Which event was it? It was Deer Valley, right? Was
Deer
it?
Valley in December.
September. And I was watching you. I even took little snippets of you on stage, and you just were so impressive. I knew I had to hear this side of you.
You're so kind. No, I was so excited to do the Deer Valley Summit in December and just really was such a great avenue for connecting with fellow marketers. I thought Brittany from Discover had an amazing, session on her work and, loved getting to connect with her and many of the other marketing leaders I met at the summit.
Yeah, she's a little subdued, though, I think. I'm
No high energy at all. Like she doesn't start her day at 11, she's
up with her. It's so amazing. She's all personality. But so anyway, I'm so happy we can do this. And I want to start because I always, as I say, I do my snooping. And I noticed on LinkedIn you were talking about the Lunar New Year and that it began January 29th. And I guess this year is, I want to get it right, the year of the wood snake, which in the Vietnamese and Chinese culture, it's a symbolism of the snake represents wisdom and transformation, and it's like shedding your skin to grow. So am I getting that right?
That's
Okay.
right. Yeah, there's always these different elements. So there's like wood, water, fire years. And so this year is the wood snake, which is very rare.
Okay. Well, so this hopefully this means a good year for everyone since it's very rare. But I want to, you went on to talk about a book that is one of your favorites. It's Think Again. And it talks about sort of letting go of sort of that old knowledge and embracing a new understanding. And so really teaching and unlearning and letting go things. And it's sort of you actually compelled people to do that. And you likened it to the shedding of the skin with the snake. So you were wanting others to do that. Well, I want you to do that. What are you planning to commit to unlearn this year?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. And I think, this idea about the year of the snake was really I think powerful to share around, it's a year for transformation and that many of us are feeling like what are the things that, we want to do differently. And I think for me, it's really focusing on letting go of the idea that things have to go a certain way, or how I imagine them. I see, no matter, the situation. I think we spend so much energy into trying to figure out, why things happen, the meaning behind it. And I want to live by more of like this idea that like what's meant for me won't miss me no matter the twists, in the moment and trusting the universe and less questioning.
Were you always that way? Like, did you always feel that way, or did you have to sort of evolve to accept, as you said, the things that happen because that's going to bring you to where you are?
No, that's part of the evolution. I think that I have probably spent, in over the course of my life, spending a lot of energy wondering why didn't this sort of work out this way? Or why didn't this happen in the way that I expected? And I think really now it's been more about like just letting go and like kind of being okay with where the path takes me.
Was there a time that something did happen that maybe you were like, oh my God, such a huge challenge, or it was such maybe a thing that was horrible or negative or however you want to describe it, but it ended up directing you in a better place that you maybe you thought it was the worst thing, but then you were able to sort of find the wisdom in it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that, there have been, I think in the past that there have been moments where like I ignored my intuition and I felt like I was stuck in a situation where I couldn't win. Like I was essentially like a player in someone else's game. And I think, without having to get into specifics, I think that it felt like I was in a position where I couldn't succeed. And I think one of my like core pieces of advice for people in terms of business and success is really ensuring that you always put yourself in a position to succeed. And I found myself in a situation where, maybe it was creating, like I was hearing feedback that like maybe this wasn't really going the way that I wanted, and that like maybe I wasn't, the right person for this, like this particular role. And I think I let I let, these voices have too much influence over how I felt about myself, or what I thought about, the trajectory that I was on. And I think that was a situation, like stepping back now, like realizing, from that situation, it was more that like I couldn't let these people have this control over how I felt about myself. And so I turned it into like this, like, okay, like I'm not going to let them determine, like what my worth is, or like what I'm good at, and have like incredible conviction about what I could do.
Yeah, no, and I think that's amazing that you were able to do that. And I guess let's go back to when you probably weren't able to do that when you were first starting out and in college and graduating and envisioning your future. Was this what you envisioned? Like like how did you get started and talk about that your path to where you are today?
No, I talk so much about this idea of like this non-linear career growth. And it's so, I think it's something I think really early in my career, I was really focused on this idea of like, hey, I'm here. This is the next step for me. And really kind of getting, obsessed with this idea of like that your growth is really sort of predetermined. I think going back to your question though, like in college, like growing up, I wanted to be a journalist. Like I wanted to be like Barbara Walters. I wanted to be like Connie Chung. And I went to journalism school, and I put in the work there, but I realized like it really wasn't the right path for me, and that I really loved this idea of storytelling, and I was really interested in consumer behavior, and I took these things I was really interested in, so like consumer behavior and storytelling, and this incredible interest in retail as like this launch pad for my career. And so it was, I think you can get really stuck in this idea that like, hey, you've already picked this path and you've got to stick with it. And I would just, I would say like to people, like, don't get stuck in this idea that like things are so predetermined for you, or like, we kind of get stuck in this idea of like opportunity cost. Like I've already spent all these years focusing on X thing, and if it doesn't happen, like maybe it was all wasted. And I think you don't want to trick yourself into thinking that. And so I think that non-linear path for me is always being really open to like opportunity and staying curious, because you don't know where you're going to end up.
Right, and just being open to it. And I know you mentioned in terms of empowering women, and that's something that's a passion of yours to really empower younger women. And as you even just said, that non-linear path. But how do you, so as a when even like when you were starting out and you realized early on that this what you were choosing wasn't necessarily where you wanted to go, but some women, as they start out, maybe they go to the opportunity or maybe they go to what they've been envisioning for themselves, but then to make that change, because it's hard to one, you need the paycheck. You have these people that you don't want to let down. You have in your head, okay, this is what I have to do. But so when someone comes to you like that today, a younger woman, how do you advise them in terms of choosing or moving forward with their career so it's what's right for them?
I That's such a good question, because I think that, again, in these conversations that I have, like many, many times the person says to me, well, I've already put X number of years into this role. Like and like to do this pivot, like I've spent so many years working towards getting to like this level in this role, and that there's a real fear behind, oh, I want to go and do something else, but now I've got to start back at the bottom. And like, is that worth it for me? But then I always counter with like, well, it's also, you also don't want to be a person that spends another 20 years, doing something that you don't feel passionate about, that really doesn't fill your bucket, when you could have invested those 2 years to like learn something new. And so I think like, again, I think it goes back to that opportunity cost. And I think we get really stuck in this idea of like, I've already invested all this time and I need to have this other thing pay off for me. But I think it's, really important to stay curious, to follow your intuition, to really go after the things you want, and like be okay that like sometimes you have to slow down in order to speed up.
Yeah. And well, ultimately, as you said, find making sure you're not just staying in something and being bored or it's not the right path, because if you're not passionate about it, that's going to show in your work. And then ultimately, you're not going to achieve the career that you may want.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm curious, is there something that most people get wrong about you? Maybe when they first meet you, they make an assumption and then they later on it's like, oh, you're not, you're like this.
I I tend to operate with this incredible bias for action. Like I'm so uncomfortable with inaction, and so I really want to move quickly. I'm decisive about things. And I think that when folks know that about me, I think when they see it, then I think that it sometimes maybe signals that I'm not open to hearing new perspectives. And I think that like that couldn't be further from the truth. Like I always want to hear what people think. Are there new ideas? Is there an opportunity for us to like revisit like an old assumption? And so I think that, like that's one of the things I think that people get wrong about me, that they can't change my mind, but I'm always really open to hearing other perspectives to understand like what did I miss.
Yeah. Well, and I think also in terms of even with your team, like how do you best like motivate your team, I guess? And I'm sure part of that is hearing their perspective, but if you're that person who's moving, 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 that must sort of energize them as well. So what do you do to sort of keep that momentum or keep your team saying, okay, let's do this?
I think, like one of the key things, like within a team and mobilizing a team is really to give them, a shared mission, a shared goal that they have to deliver together. I think sometimes in teams it can become even about like, oh, well, we really want, these teams to work better together. And I think there's no better way to do that than to give them a shared goal that they each have to play a role in delivering, and that their success is going to be measured on this goal and the delivery against this goal. Because I think we can get, I think there are things that are really important in terms of like team building, and people think like, oh, we can do these things and like the teams will be high performing. But I think like really the most effective thing is really how do you get teams to work together towards a common goal, and a mission that they can get behind. And so I think that's been really, effective in terms of mobilizing, a team they can see themselves the way that they contribute towards this goal.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I also with my snooping found you posted on uh LinkedIn about the Super Bowl. And I'm not gonna you found an ad very offensive, but your post was not to bring any type of attention to the ad, but more to bring attention to the industry and how as an industry you need to make it better. Talk about that. Like it's about examining the standards and about recognizing the importance of your position. I mean, advertisers, you can look at it, it's like, oh, it's, selling a product, but it's a bigger picture out there. That's representative of what you want the world to see. So how can starting small, starting big, in what ways can maybe they correct and be better, people in your industry?
Yeah, I think like I said in the post, it's really up to us to hold a higher standard, and to call out when the standard isn't met. I know that, as marketers, we all have to figure out the ways that we want to break through and grab attention, and that's really harder to do now as there are many things sort of out there that are sort of fighting for attention. But I think you can't just put stuff out there for shock value. I think that's very low value, and I think that we just have to hold each other to a higher standard of what we're doing.
What would you like to see, because we've seen things changing, with a lot of things, seeing better representation. But then sometimes we go a couple of steps forward and then we take another step back. What do you hope for as moving forward to see more of?
I mean, I'd love to see brands take, stronger positions. I think that sometimes we can really fall into this idea of like sameness, at times with brands. And I think that can be a really dangerous thing where you don't want to stand out. But I think it's important for brands to stand for something, to be able to know like the things that customers and users buy and love about them, and how do you ensure that you show up in that way. But I think it's important for brands to ensure like they figure out ways to stand out that are aligned with their values as a brand, and sort of break out from like the sameness.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like a small, maybe secret talent you have, and you might even think of it as inconsequential, I don't know, or it could be major, but something that people would be surprised to hear about.
um um That's an interesting question. I think, so I think the thing that's maybe not necessarily a talent, but I actually consume, I think in my role, like I consume a lot of like media. I always want to know like what's happening. I'd say like I have guilty pleasures and like I have these shows that I'll call like a brain spa, really. Like I love Murder, She Wrote with Angela Lansbury. And I love there's this British crime drama that has like 20 seasons called Midsummer Murders, and I just am like I love watching them to decompress. I think there's something cozy and comforting about them. So I will watch TikTok videos and I watch Severance, but I also am watching, Murder She Wrote. So I think that's maybe, a small guilty pleasure.
I totally agree with that. Like I'm the same, it's mindless. It's like you just, maybe before you go to bed or you just want that or whatever. It's like I've seen every Murder She Wrote. I didn't watch Midsummer, but my mom does. So when I'm visiting, I watch that with her. It's so fun. I'm a Hallmark girl. Like you just want like these, and then there's the trendy stuff that you want to, so you can talk about it at the parties or for you especially when you're marketing. But
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you like need those things that like just kind of ground you a bit.
I totally agree. So, all right. So say you have a time machine and you're going to go back to preteen age, so not quite, maybe 12. And what advice would you give young Mimi that you wish you knew then that maybe you knew now?
I would give her a big hug and I would tell her not to worry as much about things. I think when I was younger, I had a ton of anxiety about my future and really more like, this anxiety of like having to like figure it out, right? I think that we put on younger kids like, hey, you've got to declare a major and what's your interest? And I think you're always asking kids, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I think that I felt a lot of pressure that like I didn't know. Like my sister wanted to be a doctor and so she was always so definitive. And I think for me it was just like I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I'd always tell my parents like, oh, I'll just get a job in an office. And guess it worked out for me. I did get a job in an office. But I think it was really just this idea of like, don't be so worried about having to like figure it all out.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think women in general, I mean, obviously when we're younger, I think it's everyone has those own insecurities and trying to feeling like they need to plan a path. But women in general, I think are harder. I know in terms of even their expectations of when they go for a certain position, like I need to know everything. I need to check the boxes and be able to do this perfectly. And like, did you have that at one time? And if so, how did you sort of, you've definitely had an evolution. How did you kind of get past that to realize what you're doing is enough and even better?
Yeah, I mean, I still have that today where sometimes I'll feel like, oh, I need to do X thing to reach X milestone to be ready. And that's just honestly unrealistic for me to like think that way. But I think that I would say if you have a natural curiosity and you're open to the possibilities and that take every opportunity you have to build your toolbox of experiences, I think that's the most important thing. And I think people have to go after the things that they want. I think that there's often this like mentality that people have of like, well, I'll be happy when X happens and sort of like waiting, like we're always sort of like waiting for these milestones or these other things to like these perfect conditions. And like that just doesn't exist. And you just have to make the choice that like now is the time and I'm just gonna do it.
Yeah, I think, or when they get to, you say, I'll do this when I get to a certain point in my life, like, or I have,
We're always waiting. And I'm always about you gotta live for today. And like you don't wait for like I'm gonna retire to do that. It's like you gotta do this because you don't know when like life is short and you don't know what is going to change and so like always take the opportunity to seize like these opportunities that present themselves to us. I think we can always talk ourselves out of these things and say this isn't a good time and it's like don't like I think you want to ensure that you like reduce that path to future regret, which is something I talk about a lot, and so it's like just like go after it and like do the thing.
yeah, well, and this kind of segues into it, which it sounds like maybe there won't be that much, but if we were to then forward 10 years from now, is there something that you'll regret doing too much of?
I I pride myself on being pretty good about figuring out that balance. Like I'm not like big on this like work-life balance. It's all about like work-life control for me and like what are the things that you are willing to do trade-offs and being really clear on the things that you want to do and like ensuring that you do them. And so I don't know if I will say that I will regret anything because I think I'm really focused on the things that are really important and about being present, especially like when it comes to like my kids and my family and spending time with them. And so I think that you always have to think about the trade-offs and and what are like the critical like moments that you don't want to miss.
Did that take time to evolve to that? Like when, I was speaking with someone who recently basically becoming a mother was the most like it was the most surprising or the most impactful time, and realizing that a lot of things that she thought why she couldn't, like she initially wasn't planning to, she realized, wow, I can do this, I can be better, and I can still find my way. But it took sort of a figuring out. When you went into it, were you one of those, okay, I'm ready, I know I'm going, or whatever, went to combine motherhood with being a career woman? Or was there sort of this, okay, let's kind of figure it out?
There's a little bit of, I think for me, I think prior to having kids, it was definitely like I'm gonna do all these things. I'm gonna do and be all the places I want to be. And I feel really fortunate to have a really supportive family. I think my husband is amazing at, supporting all the things that I want to do and really being like this rock for our family. But I think becoming a mother was like this forcing function and just like, I was prior to having kids, like I definitely was like, I'm gonna send one more email. It's like 6:30, I'm still at the office. And like having kids for me was the forcing function I needed to be like, guess what? Like, I got to be done here at 4:30 because I've got like there's sort of like this different expectation of like these things I don't want to miss out on, that like I got to get like they became like this forcing function in a very positive way for me to have like better boundaries about like, okay, I've got to just call the ball on this thing and go do this other thing and I can pick this up later. And that was really positive for me because I think I just had one mode,
Yeah,
which
well,
was
and
work
oh,
mode, right? Like I had to get these things done and I'm still very much there, but I think it's maybe rounded me out more and saying like, oh, but I also have these other things I'm not willing to miss out on.
no, and I think it maybe, I mean, and you can tell me if that's true, but maybe you use your time better. Like in the sense, you know what I mean? Like it might make you be, okay, this is what I need to do. And it's a little bit, you're a little bit more, I don't know, within that moment of time, you get the job done, what you need to do, as opposed to, because I think we all can have these ideas like, oh, let's try it this way. Let's try it this way. Let's do this. So maybe it's kind of maybe what you streamlined you a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes you like an even more expert multitasker in terms of like, here's what just has to get done. And so I think it really it helps you prioritize like here are the most important things that I've gotta do.
Yeah, no, totally. Okay, so also on LinkedIn, you write a lot. I was like,
A lot of It's been a lot of time.
but I love all your posts. They're great. And so you were talking about Amazon. It's what is their leadership principle is think big. So I want to turn that to you. Now for them, it's really it opens the door, let me get it right, to get creative, to take risks, and not to be afraid to fail. So I want to ask you, when was the most significant time that you thought big? You took that risk, but you weren't afraid to fail.
I've told this story before about sending the blind email to Jamie, who was the founder of Ring, and telling him I wanted to work at the company. And I think that for me was this huge risk, right? Like I was at a time, this was in 2015, I was at a crossroads in my life and really trying to figure out like what was next for me in my career. And I was in a role that I wasn't feeling fulfilled in. I was spending a ton of time commuting and realizing like I wasn't really having the life, and I'm not living the life that I wanted. And I remember being in a place where like I didn't feel like I had anything to lose, like, and sending that cold email was maybe a big risk for me at the time of just like, hey, I'm going to go and do this. And I think I was so driven by like the mission of what they were doing at Ring and this idea of like you could really transform neighborhoods, and it was something I couldn't like resist like not doing. And like it really I took a time where I was just like evaluating all these things and it was just like this opportunity I had to go after.
And it seemed to work. Worked out for you.
It enabled me to have an office job,
I think that no complaints there. How about on the personal side? Any risks? And it does, I mean, obviously they can, it's a think big, but thinking big can mean a lot of things. It's not like you have to like, end world peace, like just something that you thought big, maybe it was a little bit of a risk and went forward.
I think for me, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas. I spent a bit of time in Chicago when I worked at Dyson. And I think, there was an opportunity that happened for my husband to move to LA. And I think at the time, like I was really thriving in my role at Dyson. And it was more like, okay, I think we have this philosophy that like we're always very supportive of each other and sort of like what's that right chapter in our life. And it was to move to California, but that was a huge risk for me to leave like this team that I loved. Many of my mentors, were at Dyson and take that risk to leave and come to California and do it. But like I have never regretted it. And like this is my home. And so I think there were just these things that like were really unclear, like this move and what would that look like? And I'm leaving this company that I love. But it was a risk that was absolutely worth taking.
Yeah, no, obviously. But so when younger women are getting these options to take these risks and you've had these opportunities, do you look back or do you just like dive forward? Like is it in order to get through it, do you need to just keep moving forward or like how did you handle it?
Yeah, I think you just have to continue to, look forward and be really focused onward and not spend a lot of time sort of looking back. Obviously, you want to like have some retrospective in terms of, okay, what did I learn from this situation? What would I do differently? But I think you've got to really just be focused on like the path forward and how do you continue to move on and where do you want to go and, like make those moves.
Well, and finally, I just want to ask, but I know we talked about thinking big and we have big dreams, what our 10-year plan is, although sounds like you don't want to do that, but in general, what is your 1 day plan? Like what is a good day when you go to bed at night? This was a good day. What is the plan for you to make it this works out?
In terms of, help me understand that a bit more in terms of what you're asking.
When you go to sleep, so it's not just about work, it's just like, what did you do that day? So what's, instead of that big 1 day plan, what's that plan for the day? Like it just, when you look back on it and say, yes, I was able to do this, because no day is going to go exactly as you want, but to sit there and say, this is my, like I was able to accomplish this, or maybe, you got to I'm not sure if you have sons, daughters, but whichever you got to your kids something or just whatever, some sort of relief you feel, some sort of you can look back and say, okay, this is all, if I can achieve this every day, this is a good day.
I think that's such an interesting question. If I boil down to it, I've always been so much about, what can I also do in service of others? And so I think it would be like, did I help somebody today? I think it would be this idea of like, well, did I help somebody today? And it could be my kids, or it could be my husband, or it could be someone at work, or someone that reached out to me, on LinkedIn. And so like, did I do something in service of someone else today?
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you. So, and Mimi, thank you. This has been awesome. So, like, I got to know you at the summit, but this is such a nice, refreshing side to see of you. So, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for having me.
Yes, and thank you for watching. And if you have someone you want me to pull back the curtain on, let me know. I will do my best to get her. So, thanks again, and thanks, Mimi.